What if the world told you that you didn't matter, that no matter how hard you tried, you'd never be enough? For Malik, that was his reality, a boy weighed down by struggle, invisible to everyone around him. But sometimes it's in our darkest moments that we find the light. This is the story of a boy who discovered his strength not just to change his life, but to ignite hope in others. And now his journey is about to take a turn, one that could change everything. Before we dive into today's story, let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching this video from? We'd love to hear from you. There's a weight some children are born into, a weight they never asked for, never earned, but one that defines every step they take. This is the story of Malik, a boy like so many others, a boy with big dreams but small chances. A boy who grew up in a world where hope felt like a luxury and survival was the only priority. Malik's story begins here, in a neighborhood where the streets were more familiar with struggle than success. The nights were filled with the hum of distant sirens and the occasional flicker of streetlights that hadn't been replaced in years. Behind closed doors, families were fighting silent battles against time, against poverty, against the odds stacked so high they seemed insurmountable. Malik lived in one of those homes. He shared a one-bedroom apartment with his mother, who worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. The walls were thin, the air thick with the scent of cooking that stretched into every corner of the tiny space. But for Malik, it wasn't the size of the home that bothered him, it was the silence. The kind of silence that spoke louder than words. His mother, Laila, was his entire world. She was the kind of woman who gave everything she had for her son, even when there was nothing left for herself. Every morning, she woke up before dawn, tying her hair back with a warm scarf and slipping on shoes that had seen too many years. She'd pack Malik's lunch, a peanut butter sandwich if they were lucky, and kiss him on the forehead before rushing out the door. But Malik knew. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her hands shook when she thought he wasn't looking. He knew she was tired, and he hated that he couldn't do more to help. At school, things weren't much better. Malik wasn't the loud kid, the funny kid, or the smart kid. He was the quiet one, the one who sat at the back of the classroom, hoping the teacher wouldn't call his name. Not because he didn't want to learn, but because every time he answered, he could feel the judgment in the room, the whispers, the laughter. "Why don't you ever speak up?" the teacher asked him once. Malik didn't reply. He wanted to say, "Because I don't want to be wrong, because I don't want to be laughed at, because no one believes I can get it right anyway." But instead, he just stared at his desk, his fingers gripping the edges until his knuckles turned white. Outside the classroom, the world wasn't any kinder. The neighborhood boys, the older ones who hung out on the corner, were always there, watching, waiting. They'd call out to him as he walked by, their voices sharp and mocking. "Hey, Malik, where you headed with that old book bag? You trying to be someone special or something?" The words stung, but Malik kept walking, his head down, his heart pounding. He didn't want to be like them, standing on the same corner day after day, doing nothing, going nowhere. But deep down, he was scared. Scared that maybe they were right. Maybe he was just another kid from the block, destined to be forgotten. At night, lying on his worn-out mattress, Malik would stare at the cracked ceiling, his mind racing. He'd think about his father, a man he barely remembered who left when he was just a toddler. He'd think about the dreams he didn't dare share with anyone, dreams of becoming a writer, of telling stories that mattered, of proving to the world that he was more than the place he came from. But as the hours stretched on and the sound of his mother's soft cries reached him from the other room, those dreams felt further away than ever. "Why does it have to be this hard?" Malik whispered to himself, his voice breaking in the dark. "Why does it feel like no one sees me?" The truth was, Malik felt invisible. To his teachers, he was just another student struggling to keep up. To the neighborhood boys, he was an easy target, and to the world outside his small apartment, he didn't even exist. But there was a fire inside Malik, a small, flickering flame that refused to go out, no matter how much the world tried to smother it. He didn't know it yet, but that fire would be his salvation. It would lead him to places he never imagined, to people who would change his life in ways he couldn't yet understand. For now, though, Malik was just a boy staring out of a cracked window, searching the night sky for something, anything, that would give him a reason to keep going. And somewhere out there, in the vast, endless darkness, a spark of hope was waiting for him. He just didn't know it yet. Every morning, Malik walked the same cracked streets, his backpack slung over his shoulder, the soles of his shoes worn thin from the miles he traveled. He didn't walk because he enjoyed it, he walked because he had no choice. The school bus didn't come to his neighborhood, it never had. The walk was only 10 minutes, but for Malik it felt like a lifetime. His neighborhood had a way of making you feel small. The buildings loomed over him, their windows shattered like broken promises. The older boys on the corner, the ones who seemed to be there no matter the time of day, watched him as he passed. Their laughter followed him like a shadow, sharp and cutting. "Yo, Malik, you think you're too good for us?" One of them would call out, his voice half a joke, half a threat. Malik didn't respond. He never did. He just kept walking, his head down, his heart pounding. He knew better than to stop, better than to make eye contact. But their words stayed with him. They always did. It wasn't just what they said, it was the way they said it. Like they already knew how his story would end. Like they'd seen it all before. A boy like him from a place like this, trying to escape but never making it past the block. School should have been a refuge for Malik. A place where he could dream bigger, think broader, but even here it felt like the odds were stacked against him. In the classroom, Malik was just another face in a sea of students. The teachers didn't see him, not really. To them, he was quiet, distracted, unremarkable. They didn't know that every night he stayed up late helping his mother sort through bills she couldn't pay. They didn't know that the rumble of his stomach wasn't because he skipped breakfast on purpose, but because there wasn't enough food to go around. But the other kids saw him, and they weren't kind. "You don't know the answer, do you?" one boy whispered after Malik hesitated to answer a question in class. The laughter that followed was soft but stinging. Malik kept his eyes on his desk, his hands clenched into fists under the table. He wanted to say something, anything, to defend himself. But the words wouldn't come. They never did. Outside the classroom, the hallways weren't much better. Groups of kids huddled together, laughing, joking, moving in packs. Malik walked alone. He wasn't a part of their world, and he wasn't sure he wanted to be. Lunchtime was the hardest part of the day. Malik didn't mind being alone, he was used to it. But it was the way people looked at him, or worse, didn't look at him, that hurt the most. He'd watch the other kids laughing and talking, sharing jokes and stories like the world outside didn't exist. For them, maybe it didn't, but for Malik, it was always there. The weight of his reality followed him everywhere, even to this noisy cafeteria. He didn't want their pity, he didn't even want their friendship. All he wanted was to be seen, to be understood, to feel like he mattered. The walk home was no easier. The boys on the corner were still there, their words just as sharp, their laughter just as cruel. "Hey Malik, you trying to be somebody? You think you're better than us?" Malik didn't answer, he never did, but their words hit him like stones. He wanted to shout back, to tell them that he did want to be somebody, that he wasn't better than them, he was just trying to be better for himself. But what was the point? They wouldn't listen, they never did. Deep down, Malik was afraid they might be right, afraid that no matter how hard he tried, he'd end up just like them, stuck, angry, invisible. Malik didn't recognize the boy staring back at him in the mirror. He looked tired, older than his 12 years. The spark in his eyes, the one that had once been filled with dreams of writing stories, of escaping this life, was starting to fade. "Why does it feel like no one cares?" he whispered to himself. The truth was, Malik didn't believe anyone did, not his teachers, not the kids at school, not the world outside his small, broken neighborhood. But there was one person who cared, someone who saw him even when no one else did, someone who believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. He just hadn't met them yet. Sometimes the struggles we face feel endless, like the weight of the world is too much to bear. But what if the hardest moments are just the beginning? What if, in the midst of the struggle, there's a spark waiting to ignite? Malik didn't know it yet, but his journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. There are moments in life that feel impossible to recover from. Moments when the weight of the world presses down so hard that it feels like it might break you. For Malik, this was one of those moments. His mother had been working double shifts at the diner for months. The long hours were etched into her face, the deep lines on her forehead, the shadows under her eyes. She tried to hide it from him, but Malik could see the toll it was taking. "It's okay, Malik," she said softly, her voice tired but steady. "We'll make it work." But Malik knew better. He'd seen the overdue notices piling up on the counter. He'd heard the conversations late at night when she thought he was asleep, the whispered phone calls where she begged for extensions, apologizing over and over. Tonight it was the shoes. Malik's sneakers, worn down to the soles, had finally given out. Holes in the toes, the rubber peeling off the bottom. He had tried to hide it, walking carefully so no one would notice. But his mother had seen them when he came home. "I'll get you a new pair next month," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just hold on a little longer, okay?" Malik nodded, but he didn't say anything. He couldn't. The lump in his throat was too big. He didn't want her to see him cry, not when she was already carrying so much. That night, Malik couldn't sleep. His thoughts were loud, overwhelming, circling the same questions over and over. Why is it like this? Why does it have to be so hard? He thought about the kids at school, the ones with new shoes, new backpacks, new everything. He thought about the boys on the corner, laughing and carefree in their own way, as if they'd given up on trying. And then he thought about his mother, sitting at the kitchen table, counting coins that would never be enough. It wasn't fair. None of it was fair. Malik clenched his fists, his chest tight with anger and frustration. He hated feeling this way, helpless, invisible, trapped. He wanted to scream, to cry, to do something, anything, to make it stop. But what could he do? He was just a kid with no power, no money, no way out. The next day, Malik couldn't bring himself to go straight home. He wandered the streets instead, his feet carrying him without direction. He passed the corner where the older boys usually hung out, but today they weren't there. For a moment, the silence felt like a relief, but it didn't last. The emptiness of the street only made Malik feel more alone. He stopped in front of an old boarded-up building, the windows shattered, the walls covered in graffiti. He stared at it, his mind blank, his heart heavy. This building had once been a community center, a place where kids could go after school, where they could play, learn, and feel safe. But it had been closed for years, left to decay like so much else in the neighborhood. Just another thing that's gone, Malik thought bitterly. He kicked a loose rock, watching it skid across the pavement. The sound echoed in the empty street, sharp and hollow. For a brief moment, it felt like the world had stopped, like there was nothing left but him and the silence. And there, on those cold, crumbling steps, Malik let himself feel the full weight of his despair. He thought about his mother, working herself to exhaustion. He thought about the boys on the corner, their laughter masking their own pain. He thought about the teachers who didn't see him, the kids who mocked him, the world that seemed to have no place for him. "I can't do this anymore," he whispered, his voice breaking. For the first time in a long time, Malik let the tears come. He cried for everything he had lost, everything he didn't have, everything he thought he'd never be. He cried for the dreams he was too afraid to chase, for the boy he used to be, for the man he didn't think he'd ever become. In that moment, Malik felt like he had reached the end, like the world had finally beaten him. But what Malik didn't know was that sometimes it's in our darkest moments that the light begins to find us. Sometimes it's when we feel like we've lost everything that the first seeds of hope are planted. Malik didn't know it yet, but this wasn't the end of his story. It was just the beginning of something he couldn't yet imagine. Sometimes life has a way of surprising us, just when we think we've reached the end, when the weight of the world feels too heavy to bear, something or someone appears. For Malik, it happened on a day he thought that he'd never forget, a day when he felt as though the world had turned its back on him for good. But hope has a funny way of sneaking up when you least expect it. Mr. Thompson wasn't from Malik's neighborhood, but he'd been walking these streets for years. He was a retired teacher, the kind of man who believed that every child deserved a chance, no matter where they came from. And when he saw Malik sitting there, lost and alone, he knew something was wrong. Mr. Thompson told, "Hey there, son, mind if I sit with you for a minute?" At first, Malik didn't say much. He didn't know who this man was or why he'd stopped to talk to him. But there was something about Mr. Thompson, something steady, something safe that made Malik stay. For a while, they just sat there, the silence between them broken only by the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. And then, softly, Mr. Thompson spoke. Mr. Thompson told, "You know, when I was your age, I used to sit on steps just like these. Felt like the world was stacked against me, like no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't catch a break. But you know what I learned? Sometimes we just need someone to help us carry the weight. It's not about doing it all on your own, it's about finding people who believe in you, even when you don't believe in yourself." Malik told, "Nobody believes in me." Mr. Thompson told, "Well, maybe it's time someone did. I run a little group over at the library. Nothing fancy, just a place for kids like you to come and learn, talk, figure things out. Maybe you should stop by sometime." Part of Malik wanted to laugh, to brush off the offer like it didn't matter. But another part, a smaller, quieter part, was curious. Could it really be that simple? Could someone like Mr. Thompson actually care about someone like him? Mr. Thompson told, "That one's for you. It's about a boy on a journey. Maybe you'll see a little bit of yourself in him. And remember, the library's always open. All you have to do is show up." Sometimes hope doesn't come in a grand gesture or a life-changing event. Sometimes it comes in the form of a stranger with kind eyes and a simple gift. Malik didn't know it yet, but this moment, this unexpected encounter, was the beginning of something new. A spark had been lit, and though it was small, it was enough to push him to take that first step toward a different future. For a few days, Malik didn't go to the library. He thought about it, though, every night as he stared at the ceiling in his room. He thought about Mr. Thompson's words, about the book he left behind, The Alchemist. Malik read the first few pages, and then a few more, until he couldn't stop. He wasn't sure what it was about the story that pulled him in, but for the first time in a long time, he felt something stir inside him. And so, one afternoon, he finally worked up the courage to walk through those library doors. "Mr. Thompson, Malik. Glad you made it. Come on, take a seat." "Mr. Thompson, everyone, this is Malik. He's joining us today. Malik, this is your crew now. We're here to learn, to grow, and to help each other figure out this thing we call life." At first, it wasn't easy. Malik wasn't used to being part of something, and he didn't know if he belonged. But the more he came to the library, the more he began to see things differently. Mr. Thompson wasn't just a mentor, he was a guide. He didn't lecture or judge. Instead, he asked questions, the kind that made Malik think about things he'd never considered before. "What do you want, Malik?" he asked one day. "Not what the world says you should want. What do you want?" Malik didn't know how to answer at first. No one had ever asked him that before. But over time, as he spent more afternoons at the library, surrounded by books and people who actually listened, the answers slowly began to form. Books became Malik's escape and his inspiration. He devoured stories of people who had struggled and overcome, of ordinary people who had done extraordinary things. He began to see himself in those stories, to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could be more than what the world expected of him. But it wasn't just the books, it was the people. The other kids at the library became his friends, his community. They shared their struggles, their dreams, their fears, and for the first time, Malik realized he wasn't alone. As Malik grew stronger, he began to share that strength with others. He started writing again, stories about his life, his dreams, his neighborhood. His words were raw and honest, filled with the pain and hope he had carried for so long. His mother noticed the change first. She saw the way his shoulders didn't slump as much, the way his eyes didn't seem so distant. She saw her boy becoming someone new, someone who believed in himself for the first time. And then came the day Malik did something he never thought he'd have the courage to do. He stood in front of the group at the library and read one of his stories aloud. His voice shook at first, but as he kept reading, it grew steady, strong. The story was about a boy who felt invisible, who thought the world had forgotten him. But in the end, the boy found his voice, he found his strength. When Malik finished, the room was silent for a moment, and then, one by one, the kids began to clap. Mr. Thompson smiled, his eyes filled with pride, and for the first time, Malik felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt seen. Malik's journey wasn't over, it was just beginning. But now, he walked with a confidence he hadn't known before. He had found his voice, his strength, his purpose, and though the road ahead would still have its challenges, Malik knew one thing for sure. He wasn't the same boy who had sat on those steps, lost and alone. He was stronger now. He was ready to keep going. Malik had come a long way. He discovered his voice, his strength, and his purpose. He wasn't the same boy who used to walk with his head down, avoiding the stares and taunts of the world. But as much as he had grown, there was something that still lingered, a weight he couldn't shake, a story he hadn't finished. The boys on the corner, every day he walked past them. And every day he could still hear their voices, their laughter, their mocking words echoing in his mind. Malik didn't hate them. In truth, he understood them. He knew why they were there, why they stayed. It was the same reason he had once felt so stuck, because sometimes it feels like the world has already decided who you're going to be. Older boy told, "Yo, Malik, you trying to be somebody special? Keep dreaming, kid, you ain't going nowhere." Back then, there were words that cut deep. They'd made him doubt himself, made him question whether he could ever be more than just another kid from the block. But now, Malik saw things differently. Those boys weren't his enemies, they were trapped just like he had been, and he couldn't ignore them anymore. For weeks, Malik had been thinking about what he could do, how he could make a difference. It wasn't enough to just change his own life. He wanted to give others the chance to change theirs too. And so, he wrote the letter, a letter to the boys on the corner, a letter that spoke to their pain, their struggles, their fears, a letter that told them they were more than the streets, more than the stereotypes, more than what the world told them they had to be. In the letter, Malik shared his story, the nights he spent lying awake, feeling invisible, the days he walked through the world feeling like he didn't belong. And the moment he met Mr. Thompson, the man who had helped him see the possibilities he never thought existed. "You don't have to stay there," he wrote. "You don't have to let the world tell you who you are. You can be more. You can leave the corner behind. You can find your purpose, just like I did, and I'll be here to help you." It would have been easy for Malik to walk past them, to ignore them like he used to, but this time he didn't look away. This time he walked straight toward them. Older boy told, "What do you want, Malik? You finally here to prove you're better than us?" Malik told, "No, I'm here to help. Read it or don't, it's up to you, but I'm not giving up on you." He turns and walks away, his heart pounding. The boys watch him go, their laughter quieter now, their eyes lingering on the envelope. The camera lingers on the group as the older boy picks up the envelope, staring at it silently. Malik didn't know if they would read the letter. He didn't know if it would change anything, but he had to try. Because Malik understood something now, something Mr. Thompson had taught him. Change doesn't happen all at once. It starts small, with a single moment, a single choice, a single spark. And maybe, just maybe, that letter would be the spark those boys needed to see the light Malik had found. Sometimes, the hardest step isn't finding your own strength, it's sharing it with others. What would you do if you had the chance to change someone else's life? Malik didn't know what would happen after he left the letter with the boys on the corner. He didn't know if they'd laugh at it, rip it up, or just toss it aside without a second thought. But what he did know was that he had done what he could. He had reached out, extended a hand, and offered them something he had once thought was impossible for himself: hope. For days, Malik waited. He went back to the library, back to his writing, back to the life he was working so hard to build. But even as he moved forward, a part of him couldn't stop thinking about the boys on the corner. Had they read the letter? Did it mean anything to them? Or had it already been forgotten? And then, one day, Malik saw them, the boys he had once feared, the boys who had taunted him and made him doubt himself. But now they weren't laughing or mocking, they were reading. The older boy, the one who had spoken to Malik so many times with disdain, was holding the letter. His eyes scanned the words, his expression unreadable. The other boys watched him, waiting. And then, slowly, he looked up and saw Malik. It wasn't much, just a nod. But for Malik, it was everything. It was an acknowledgement, not just of the letter, but of the possibility that things could be different, that they could be more. Malik's journey wasn't just about finding his own strength. It was about sharing it, about using what he had learned to lift others up. And as he grew, so did the impact of his actions. The boys on the corner didn't change overnight, but little by little, Malik began to notice them shifting. One of them started coming to the library just to check it out. Another asked Malik for help with a job application. Small steps, but steps forward nonetheless. Malik had once felt invisible, like his voice didn't matter, but now he was using that voice to make a difference. "We all have a story," he told the group one day. And it doesn't matter where you come from or how hard things have been. Your story can change, you can write a new chapter, you just have to believe in it, and in yourself. Malik's neighborhood hadn't changed overnight. The struggles were still there, the challenges still real, but now there was something else, something stronger: hope. Malik had learned that change doesn't have to be big to matter. Sometimes it starts with a single moment, a single choice, a single voice choosing to speak up. And sometimes that voice can inspire others to do the same. And now it's your turn. Maybe you felt like Malik, lost, invisible, unsure of your place in the world. Or maybe you've seen someone else struggling, someone who just needs a little bit of hope to keep going. The truth is, we all have the power to make a difference. Whether it's in your own life or in someone else's, change starts with a single step, a single moment of courage, a single act of kindness. So, what will you do? Whose life will you help change? And how will you use your voice to make the world brighter? What would you do if you had the chance to change someone's life? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story inspires you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that matter. Together, we can share hope and rewrite the narrative. Dapiku.